Okay, today we're BOF Live welcomes Thom Browne from New York, and we've been waiting to do this for, well, I've been waiting to do this for a long time. It's been quite hard to coordinate things, but Thom, of course, is, after his Olympic Games spectacular last season, is preparing another virtual treat for us this season, which he is unable to talk about, isn't he?
Yes.
How have you found this time? Because you are one of the designers for whom a physical presentation is extremely important as a sort of crystallization of, what you want to say for the season. So how wearing have you found the last year?
The last year has, honestly, it has been exhausting. But I mean, the most important thing for me, and I think for everyone that I work with, was very early on just to just concentrate on what we can do and not what we can't do. And I think that's what has gotten us all through the year. But for me, in regards to the collections, which, as you know, are so important for me in regards to, I don't know if I would want to be in fashion if I didn't get to do my shows. So trying to figure out how I could try to achieve the same impact virtually as I try to in real life. And I think I've always been, interested in film and in directing, and in my live shows, I feel like they're presentational and something that I direct for each show. So it's been fun for all of us to be able to direct small little short films, videos that hopefully people feel like they're getting the same, not the same type of experience, but an experience that is as important as if they were to sit at.
Has it changed the way you approach design, though, knowing that it won't be seen in those very, very finessed environments that you usually create for your clothes?
No, I approach it the exact same way.
Oh. Have you acquired new skills, do you think, would you say?
Sorry, you froze there for a second.
Oh, have you acquired new, you did too, that was very interesting. I thought you were being completely Sphinx-like. Have you acquired new skills? I mean, I think of you, I think with your shows, they were like Broadway productions. And you were like the sort of an impresario there. Obviously, creating virtual and a virtual identity. Well, it could be huge. You did an Olympic Games with you staged the Olympic Games with your last presentation. I've always thought of you as somebody who was made for filmmaking. I know you've denied that. You've denied that a few times. You do like the live aspect of fashion.
I do. I love the ideas of in-person presentations. But I think, yeah, I guess that is the one skill was trying to figure out how to interpret that virtually. And I guess that is the difference in the skill set and is more in the world of filmmaking.
I think of your design identity as being quite codified. I think people people associate you with a very clear set of visual triggers. And a few weeks ago, you launched a children's wear collection, and it was the film by Harley Weir,
Casper.
Cass Bird. Yes, sorry. The film by Cass Bird it was great to see the Thom Browne world writ small. All those kids were wearing Thom Browne clothes in your classic office environment with manual typewriters and things. It was very entertaining, and it was quite perverse, I thought. How did you, when you're approaching something that's as new for you as children's wear and as sort of odd in the grand Thom Browne universe, and odd to put all those kids in your environment. You love an office environment. You love that sort of Kafkaesque corporate thing. Tell me a little bit about that, because that stayed with me, that film.
Yeah, see, for me, it's in my head, it looks more like an art installation. And for me, it transcends the idea of an office environment. And of course, stepping back a little bit, if I'm going to do something new within, the business of Thom Browne, I want to make sure that people see the reason why I'm doing it and that it fits within the rest of the world. And so for me, approaching kids was very easy because I thought I'll just do what I do for adults for kids. And I thought it felt very, well, one, very authentic to me. And also two, I thought it felt very unique because I think, it's not like I'm an expert on kids' clothing, but I feel like tailoring for kids is not the usual approach for, I think, a children's collection. But it felt good. And also too, for me, showing it in a way that felt very pure to what people would expect to see from me. And I love the idea of being rigorous in regards to, almost beating a dead horse in regards to one single, idea. And really for the past almost 20 years, I've been taking that same idea. I mean, you've seen it from Florence all the way through till now. It's something that is so interesting to me, but also too, it's an idea that I feel transcends fashion. It makes it seem that, I think there's so many people doing so many interesting things now that I think, in a way, we've seen through this year is that I think people are being really creative in doing things that are even more important than fashion, even though fashion is, very, very important for all of us.
Are you talking about the way that the world has been activated in the last year? There have been the inescapable, social issues became so overwhelming and inescapable that everybody had to respond, and fashion really has had to take a stand on things in the last year. I think it's been extremely valuable for the industry to actually have to fight for its relevance in a way, especially when it was so closed down in so many other ways. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and I think that, sometimes people just look at fashion as a commercial idea and a commercial, for people to approach it commercially. And I think this year, people have had to become so creative. And I think that is what I think we've all really found, that people want pure creativity and they want to be inspired and they want to see the ideas that take them, out of, sometimes the world we're living in right now, and really just to purely inspire and want, just look for so much more. And I think that's what, I think one is our responsibility, but also two, I think that's what you're seeing in this year. And I think that is what is really, really inspiring about this year.
But would you agree that restriction actually encourages creativity in a way?
Yeah, I think it's, it almost comes down to, because you have, so I guess you don't really have less access because you have the internet, and, if that's your way of getting inspiration or getting, access to things, that's fine. But like for me, the idea of just closing your eyes and thinking of something new it's how I approach things. And that's, and I think in a way, because people couldn't move around, or I think maybe it forced people to create differently or to get inspired differently. And I think that is really important to
Do you mean that they've had to look inside themselves maybe a little more than usual? You have always maintained that to me, that when I ask you about, what you might have been looking at or listening to for a collection, you often dance around the idea of those really obvious kind of input things that other designers talk about. You're not going to say this is my Fellini collection or anything.
I've driven you crazy over the years, haven't I, Tim?
You what?
I've driven you crazy over the years.
No, but I think that so this situation where people have been denied access to all their usual, research facilities like libraries and so on, this would be a good time for you because when you're thrown back on your own resources, that's where you're best. Would you say that?
Yeah. I mean, because in regards to being inspired or, working, purely creating or designing, I wasn't missing anything. So, for me, I'm very easy in regards to being home and just, thinking of, my sophomoric ideas.
Your sophomoric ideas. Is that literally how it happens? You sit down, close your eyes, and there it is.
Well, of course, I have 55 years of references in my head, so it's not like it's I'm starting from a blank slate. But I do find it more interesting to challenge myself, and really that's what I have a great team that I work with. That I want original ideas. I don't want any fashion references. I don't want any references that have been done really well in the past. I want something that's new, and I want to make the mistakes to be able to make something new.
How difficult is that to come up with stuff that is new?
It's not. No, it's not easy. It's not easy, but I think it's a lot more. It's a lot more interesting, and it's a lot more fulfilling for everyone.
See, I would have thought, I've said this before, so you won't punch me in the face next time you see me, but it feels like, a psychiatrist would have a, have you ever been in therapy? It feels like a psychiatrist would have fun with you because your collections, especially, I'm thinking probably more and earlier, I think when you were feeling your way through the industry, somebody could say you were working out childhood things, like fairy tales work out childhood things, that some of your shows were quite specifically delving into the psyche of a children's fears and dreams and so on. I don't know if you ever read Bruno Bettelheim, The Uses of Enchantment, but if people are doing theses on Thom Browne's clothes, that would be quite a good book to read. But when you talk about going inside and finding the inspiration in yourself, how important was your childhood to you?
It was very important. I mean, it was very important in that it was very classic American, middle American upbringing, and for me, it was, I guess, not externally inspiring, but internally in that there was so much inside of me that wanted to get out. And I think that's what that's what I think you see in the collections. There's so much that I like to do things that aren't so ordinary or maybe a little bit sometimes boring, but for me, they're not so boring, or some things that are very rigorous. I love the idea of repetition and the monotony of repetition. And maybe that's from my, Catholic upbringing or, so I love taking things that were somewhat mundane from my childhood and try to make them interesting. And I think that's what you see, especially from the beginning with the repetition of that gray suit. I think there's something for me very interesting about it in regards to the monotony of it and the rigor in it, because most people wouldn't think of that as being, some wouldn't think of it as being fashion, which I think is great. I didn't think of it as fashion either at the beginning. But I love the idea of interpreting that in a very rigorous way.
But you came from a big family, and they all became lawyers and doctors. Were you the middle? You were the middle child, so you were the sort of classic middle child in a way. Would you say you were the black sheep?
I was, in regards to, I wanted to do something different than everybody else. I mean, my brothers and sisters they're successful, and they're all, so accomplished in what they do. And I knew I wanted to, do things at, you know, at the same level as that they were doing, but I knew I didn't want to be a doctor or an attorney. So it took me longer to figure it out. But
So would you say you were sort of motivated by a spirit of rebellion a little bit? Were you naughty?
no, I was never bad. I always, but there was always something in me that always wanted to be different. I never wanted to be like everyone else. And I think that's what you see. Even when I was living in LA, you know, my best friend, Johnson Hartig, who designs Libertine, we were such good friends because we were really on our own in LA. I worked tailoring in LA, and, you know, everyone when they moved to LA basically got rid of all their tailoring and gave it to vintage stores and put on jeans and t-shirts. And for me, I just didn't want to be like everyone else. And that is probably one of the biggest motivators for me in regards to what I do now too, because I have zero interest in doing something that everybody else is doing.
You know, when you started, you talk about the gray flannel, you know, how other people would never have thought of that as fashion. And, you know, when you started, you were extremely subversive, and you were considered you were considered a rebel spirit, just by not doing what everybody else was doing the extreme tailoring, taking tailoring to an absolute precise millimeter difference changes everything. The trousers were shorter, the sleeves were shorter, the whole thing, the idea of shrunken tailoring was so radical at the time you were doing it. You must have had a sense of that being extremely perverse.
I didn't look at it as being perverse, but I looked at it as being really provocative, and I wanted people to see the difference. And I wanted people to notice it, and I wanted them to see something that they didn't understand, and they didn't know why they didn't understand it. And that was really interesting to me.
So now people understand, obviously.
Yeah.
You have a $500 million business, so people understand.
I mean, because the business has grown and the collections have been, you know, seen for, you know, almost 20 years. But I mean, there's still a lot of people that don't get it. And I love it. And I love the idea that initial idea is still being challenged by people. And I love that. I love it. Because I think once it becomes too universal, then I think then it might not be interesting to me anymore.
You, right from the beginning, you were fearless and that you were your own best model. And I remember the first few times I met you when you came to London, and you were doing a tailoring thing. You were taking private orders for tailoring at the very beginning. And you looked so extreme. And, you know, that obviously people laughed. And I remember once you said that to me after one of your more extreme spectacles, that you don't care if people laugh because you're there too.
Yeah.
That's if that's the reaction, you're happy because you're getting a reaction. And I thought there was kind of a bravery in that you it seemed to me you almost encouraged those responses, that you balanced the extreme precision of what you made with the kind of outrage of how you brought that to people.
I knew I was taking that and, you know, putting that upon myself, and I really welcomed it, and I loved it, and I still love it. And I think anybody that is wanting to do something interesting or different has to take that on and has to be responsible for the idea that not everyone is going to like it, and, you know, and that's great, and that has to be the approach. Because if you're looking to please everyone, you're boring.
It has to be a totality then.
Yeah.
Because you know there must have been people who thought you went home and put on board shorts and a tank top.
Yeah.
But you never ever did that.
No, because I mean, but I would also hope that people see that this is authentically me. I mean, I love this myself, and I started it because I wanted it myself. And that is, I think, one of the reasons why at the beginning, not everybody laughed at it, because they saw that at least I was doing something I was liking it. And I think if I was just trying to create something that was just for shock value or for fashion, then I think people would have just dismissed it totally.
But you know, when somebody has such an acute understanding of discipline, I always think they must have an equally acute appreciation of what chaos means.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that's true of you?
Um, I prefer the more disciplined side.
But to be so
I totally understand, the difference and appreciate the difference because I love it, but then I love the idea that it's true and not, it's not put on.
At what point did it start to appeal to you to show your clothes in such incredibly spectacular ways with these really, really focused, choreographed extravaganzas that also courted, a range of responses that the sheer ritualistic element of what you did. It was like no, Japanese no drama or something. It was so, or kabuki, or it was just so, it is so formalized. When did that start becoming a thing for you?
I don't know, I think initially when I entertained the idea of first doing, the shows, I guess I wanted to entertain. I think there's a huge part of me that wants people to appreciate the entertainment value as well. And, of course I want people to see the collections and I want them to see the serious work that goes into the collections and the clothing. But I also want it to be surrounded by a story, or I want it to be surrounded by an experience for people. And that is very important to me, because I think the clothing with the story is a lot more interesting than just seeing the clothing walking back and forth. So it was almost selfishly that I wanted to do the performance part of what I do, because it was something that was interesting to me.
That was where I would always come at you, though, that performance element. I mean, like Busby Berkeley or something, like those choreographed performances, so strict,
Yeah,
and so, like I said, ritualized and slow, defiant.
I know, but that's for me. That rigor, I think, is so interesting and so inspiring. And for me, it's me. It's me. And that was what I wanted people to see was, if you want to see my approach to presentation or the world of fashion, this is how I am approaching it. And the idea of rigor and monotony, and sometimes the fatigue and it being very slow. And I mean, you remember the one show that somebody even walked out that was in Paris, and which I didn't appreciate, honestly, but
I remember a few shows where people walked out.
I know one. For me, I love the tension and the uncomfortable nature of sometimes that. And
Why? It's such an interesting thing, because obviously a fashion audience, which is used to just woof and out the door to the next thing, to be pinned to the spot.
but it's not. It's not like it's ours.
No, I always thought that was you. Well, you were saying to people, stop and look at this. You were.
Well, stop and experience this.
Yeah, stop and experience. Slow down and experience this.
And sometimes the solitude of and the tension in having to sit quietly, I think, was great for me, but it drove everyone crazy. It's like the one women's show that I had York, shushing everyone for granted, it was a little bit longer than I had intended, but it was so much fun for me because I mean, even my sister, you know, afterwards said she was going crazy with York shushing her. But I love that tension. I do love that tension.
Now, tell me about loving tension, because the tension, you know, you're putting people on the spot. And sometimes, you know, when you did the gray flannel wood, all the animals and all the plants and things in gray flannel, which was so stunning. I hope it's in a museum somewhere. Where is that? It's not in a warehouse, is it?
Well, it's not in a museum now, but it has been shown. Yeah.
But obviously it will be wonderful to see that permanently installed somewhere, because it was so complete
Yeah.
and remarkable, and you wanted to be in that world for a long, long time. Then there were other worlds where you did feel the tension was a little overwhelming, and you did want to shriek your head off, and you see people doing this, you know. And I mean, in a way, when I look at that, it amuses me, and I can imagine you watching it on the monitor backstage and getting a kick out of that. I am making them stay. They're going to miss dinner.
No, it's not like I'm making them stay. This is part of it.
Mm.
And I'm not making you stay. This is part of the show. This is part of what I want you to see in this collection. It's part of the story. It wasn't a conscious, you know, decision to just make you sit and see nothing. The quiet and the solitude and the rigor in that
And
moment
tension.
are very intentional.
Very contrary to the way the industry works. You know, like if you think about Karl Lagerfeld dragging an iceberg into the Grand Palais, huge effort, huge, but still people looked at it for 8 minutes and then they were gone. It feels to me, you know, one thing I would say about the amazing fashion shows I've seen in the past, it's a shame that they're over so quickly and that they're never repeated, and it's a one-time only thing. It's heartbreaking in a way, and it also seems it seems kind of profligate to spend so much time and money making this thing that people only see once. But on the other hand, that's part of the sort of strange pleasure of it, that it is so transient. Do you feel like that about your things? Are you sorry that they only exist for that moment? Would you love to take your show on the road and let people see this sort of gorgeous vaudeville?
Yeah, I mean, some shows more than others, but no, I mean, they're so important to me that it is. I do. I am sad when they're over because there is so much that goes into them, and they are so. For me, they're short. Everybody thinks they're long, but for me, they're very short, and there's so much work that goes into them, and I do miss them, and you know, I don't really look back and look at them very often, but sometimes I do, and I just have such nice memories of them and the people that were around me at that time, the people that worked with me on them. And so they are something that I wish could live on forever. And granted, nowadays they are, you know, recorded and they're, you know, so
Do you have favorites?
well, there are important ones. I can't say that they're more important. I can't say they're my favorites, but of course, Florence is very important because it was my first show in Europe, and it really showed the world that I wanted to create, and the idea of fashion art, somewhat, art fashion transcending in a way into the art, more in the art presentational world.
Was that the typewriters?
Yeah.
Yeah. How many typewriters?
It was 40 guys, 40 typewriters. Yeah. So that's very important. My first women's show in Paris, of course, was important. The unicorn, but they're all important. I mean, I can't say that, you know, this one coming up, I think is very special. So.
And is your approach to it different because of the year we've been through? Do you feel it needs to achieve something else than, say, the Olympic Games one achieved? I mean, do you feel it needs to impress people in a different way?
No, I think not in a different way, but I think I've always challenged myself to be as creative as possible. But I think it does. I think we are living in a world that you have to be even more creative. I think you really have to, like, make people see things differently and inspire them more and pull them out of the world we're living in now, and just give them hope for that there's so much to really be thankful for, you know, and look forward to.
Do you feel that's something you've been able to achieve through the rest of your career, that you've given people a different way of looking at menswear and fashion and actually what's achievable in, you know, people have very set ideas about what fashion is. So when you give them something which is completely different from that, you know, you are hopefully changing their minds about everything. So do you feel you've been able to achieve that?
I hope so in some way.
Are you surprised by how influential you've become?
I don't really think about that. So I'm glad that I'm still here 20 years later, and you know, business is good, and I'm able.
What would you have said your ambition was 20 years ago when you started doing this? What did you hope to achieve then?
I didn't even think about it. I wanted to start from what I made for myself, and I wanted to entertain that idea for other people. And I didn't think, of course, I dreamed long term what it could be, but I didn't think about it because I was so focused on just the day to day on getting things done.
It's been a remarkably consistent upwards arc. When there can't be too many people now who still have elements in their collection from 20 years ago. I mean, I can think of Rick Owens, for example, but and actually he's a good analogy in a way. But you know, generally fashion is not supposed to kind of cling to things from the past. It moves on at a reckless pace. And so, you know, it feels to me, in a funny way, it feels to me like Thom Browne is a philosophical statement about what fashion is, you know, what fashion can be.
I never wanted my fashion to change. I wanted it to evolve, and I wanted to, that's why it was very important at the beginning to really think of what was so important for me. And I think that strong idea, I wanted it to be something that was around forever. And I think that's what you see with most, I think the most important iconic designers, like you say, Rick, and you know, the most iconic designers through the years that have done something really impactful. You think of one, like you have an image in your head, what they represented.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. That was what was important for me.
So you're iconic. You know, Craig Green says that.
Was the
Have you frozen? Have I frozen? No. Craig Green says that one thing he would love to achieve is Andy Warhol used to say that as well. He wished that he'd invented Levi's jeans. I guess it's a pretty obvious question. What's the Thom Browne iconic piece?
I think it's the proportion of that gray suit.
The shorts?
No, I think it would be the proportion of the jacket and trouser together. I think the proportion that I started with at the beginning, which is still as strong now as it was back then.
Now you talked about other designers there, so you do have sort of benchmarks. And I think, I suppose, Christian Dior with the new look, you could say that Thom Browne was the new look in menswear, I guess.
That would be nice to hear.
But who were you worked for, at the very beginning of your career, you worked for Armani, you worked for Ralph Lauren, you worked for Club Monaco. You were sort of embedded in that kind of, no, Armani I always think of as a revolutionary, actually. I do think of him as a revolutionary in fashion. But you worked with people who were very clearly identified with a look. And I've always thought that must have been quite influential for you.
It was, I mean, you knew what they stood for. You had an image in your head when you thought of them. And that was what I really learned from them.
So clarity. I mean, I think what would you tell somebody coming into, do you ever do this? Do you ever talk to students and things, and when do people come up to you and say, how do I become you? And you give them some tips. What would you do? What?
Don't try it. It's not as fun as it looks.
What would you say to somebody?
You just better want to do it. You better really want to do it, because it's not as easy as you think. And don't get into it wanting to be rich and famous, because it's not going to happen. Most likely not going to happen.
Except for some people. Yeah, were you surprised by that at all? Are you surprised that it's been as successful as it is? I mean, obviously you had complete faith in yourself, but you know, that doesn't get everyone everywhere in the end. So were you surprised that it did turn out to be as huge as
No,
it
I'm
is?
surprised. I'm just very thankful, because I'm very competitive with myself, and I'm very driven, and I almost approach it as a sport, and I want to make sure that I do as well as I can. That's one thing that my family, my brothers and sisters, we all learned from my mother and father was, if you want to do something, do it as well as you can, and really work. And I think that's the one thing. It's been a lot of work, but also too, it's not like I'm sitting here on my own. I have over 400 employees now, and I have really, really strong, talented people around me that have, helped me along the way. And, because it's been a lot of work, a lot of work.
Has there ever been a moment when you doubted yourself?
Never doubted myself, but in 2009, it was challenging, and I had to figure out how it was going to survive.
And what was your decision? What did you do? That was after the 2008 collapse. So how did you stay afloat then?
Because I was totally self-funded at that point. And then I knew that in order to survive, I needed to figure out financially how I could get some help and keep it going. And, because I had the responsibility of my employees that I didn't want to, them to feel what was going on. And, so I was very conscious in making sure that I just kept it going, because also too, I could never do it again. There was so much time and energy and emotion that went into those first really formative years that I couldn't do it again. So I knew I had to keep it going.
Wow. That's kind of Shakespearean.
Yeah.
Like Macbeth. It's too hard. It's harder to go back than it is to go on.
No, it was more like it was like the athlete in me just like kicked into gear, and I was like, I need to just keep going, and I need to, because I had, I still feel like I'm small enough that everyone around me, I feel, is family. And back then I think there were 10 of us. So it was even more so. So I needed to keep it going for all of us.
People are saying that the challenge that the fashion industry is facing now is as severe as it was then, or maybe even more severe. How are you weathering this storm? How's your business weathering this storm?
We've been really fortunate. Our business is actually better than ever. We had the best year yet last year, and looking forward to this year being better than last year's.
And what do you attribute that to?
I think because people know what I do,
mm-hmm.
and the consistency in what I do, I think, has been the reason why. And also to really talented, good employees that figured out how to get through last year.
Do you think that people will be looking to fashion? There's so much talk about the roaring 20s. I don't know how much of it is wishful thinking, but I guess it does make sense that when these restrictions lift, that people are going to want to go out and go wild, maybe, I don't know. But do you have a feeling that fashion's uh, place, that fashion's role in culture will change, that fashion's relevance will change, and that people will be looking to fashion for different things than they were looking at it for 2-3 years ago?
Yeah, I think they're going to want the inspiration from the creativity in fashion. They're not going to like solely look at it as a commercial venture. I think they will be looking at it as a pure, like you can really look at fashion from a purely creative point of view, and I think that's what people will look at from fashion. Or I hope.
Do you think starting to do women's wear was sort of liberating in the way that, you know, I'm talking about fashion being liberated um, after this, whenever this happens, 2023 or whenever, that, you know, banality won't be something that appeals to people. They'll be looking for something that is a little bit extraordinary. Do you think women's wear kind of filled that function for you, that you were able to move into a whole other area of very eccentric creation? And yeah, do you think that happened?
I think it complemented what I was doing for men's, because I feel like in the men's collections, I feel like I tried to really push myself to create really provocative ideas as well. Women's is another challenge, but I think they both complement each other really well. So I don't think it's like it was more challenging. I think it was, or a different challenge. I think they both complemented each other, the two challenges.
What ideal did you have in your head when you started doing women's wear? Did you just want to create a complement, or did you have a very clear notion of what women's wear was missing that you could provide?
I wanted to approach it the exact same way. I wanted to start from that really classic tailored point of view and then push it in whatever direction I thought was interesting. That's, so that's what I wanted to do.
It seems the way you've brought your women's wear and men's wear together, it's a very statement. It's a huge statement the way you do that. What are you hoping to achieve with that? Is it a sort of, I mean, again, very ritualized and kind of sci-fi, I find sometimes. It's this sort of brave new world that has such creatures in it, you know, that you are making you're creating these Thom Browne hybrids.
I like people seeing the connection between the two collections, but also too, I love the idea of, we live in an amazing world right now that men are interested in seeing things differently and women are interested in seeing things differently. And I think the idea of, and I wouldn't say it's unisex, but really creating collections that really can morph into one idea of a collection.
And is that consciousness, is that consciousness in you sharpened by what's been happening in the world outside, the way gender and identity and all these notions that were so fixed for centuries and now so much more fluid?
Yeah, I mean, I started entertaining the idea before I think it became, I think, more in the conversation. And I think, so I think it's easier now to do it. I think the one collection that I did that was very menswear looking, but it had the provocative idea of, as opposed to the trouser being a skirt with the jacket. And as simple as that idea was, there was something so beautiful and interesting in that. And I call it the why not collection, because it's like, well, why not? Why couldn't it die? And so it's been an idea that's really interesting for me for a long time. And I think it's just so that's the beauty in the world we live in right now. There's so much you can do, and it's very accepting.
Do you feel any kinship with Rei Kawakubo at Comme des Garçons?
I mean, I respect her, and I think she's one of the.
I think that when you ask, whenever you ask that question, if ever you pose that question, why, of Comme des Garçons, the obvious answer is always, why not? But I'm always curious, though, about where you see yourself sitting. What kind of lineage in fashion do you imagine you're a part of? You know, what designers do you see as your forebears?
I mean, you know me, I'm not a historian.
I know, I know.
You know, I think, you know,
Your partner's one of the best fashion historians in the world. He could provide lots of answers for you, I'm sure.
we'll refer that to Andrew.
So he must have whispered in your ear sometimes, you know.
No, you know, I don't really, I don't look, you know, historically at, you know, I'll let other people kind of, you know, answer that question.
Well, no, you did mention designers who have been identified with a particular thing. I mean, who are you thinking of when you think about that? Are you thinking of
Rick,
menswear designers, womenswear designers, or?
Rick, of course, Ray, of course, John Galliano, of course, you know, Lee, Alexander McQueen, um, uh, Chanel, Dior, you know, Saint Laurent, you know, the ones that you have an idea in your head when you think of their names.
So when I say lineage, if you say you're not a historian, would you you don't think about fashion history in that way? Do you like the idea after everything you've done, after all the work and all the sort of, I mean, the massive amounts of, and even though you won't own up to stuff about what your inputs are, there's a huge amount of creative thinking that goes into what you do. Would you like to be a part of, do you hope that you'll be a part of that story? Do you hope that people would look at you in the same way they look at those people and say, oh yes, he changed things?
I would hope I did something that was important enough that people remember me for something. Yes.
That history will remember you. Do you even think of what you do as being fashion?
I know people see it, of course, in fashion, but there's more to it than just fashion because I feel like the how I present my collections to the world, I think, transcends fashion in a way.
Yeah, and that when it transcends fashion, where does it take it? If somebody you are an artist on the side. I don't know what would I say, that your art is something else you do, your art is what you do in your spare time, or how would I describe it?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how much time I have. I love the idea of doing things outside of this world too, and it really just comes down to time.
I mean, there's a huge performance component in what you do. So people could say performance art. Um, do you think fashion isn't art? I mean, it seems to be a dirty question for designers. Like, I think Issey Miyake is one of the greatest, is a great artist, but he would scoff at the idea that he was an artist. So I wonder how you feel if somebody said you're an artist, not a designer.
Well, I wouldn't say that myself. I would, you know,
Let
let
somebody else say it.
but I think that's what Andrew has done, you know, the the best of, you know, better than anyone is that he has brought the fashion world into the idea of it being an art form. And I think nobody has done that better than Andrew.
So you wouldn't be averse to somebody else saying that?
No, it's a compliment. I mean, why wouldn't? Because I do think we're creating, you know, fashion is, we are creating. And I think art is the act of creation and putting interesting ideas in front of people. And I think that is what we do.
Given that you are so complete in the way you realize your visions, um, so you know, you're just you carry things from beginning to closure so completely. Do you ever stop and wonder what you'd be doing if you weren't doing what you do? Like if things had turned out differently, what do you imagine you would be doing?
I don't know. I don't think about it because it would scare me because I don't know. No, but there was, and it brings me back to 2009 in a way. If it were to stop, what would I have done? And it took me so long to get to figuring out what I wanted to do from university to doing this that it's exactly what I want to do. And I love doing it. And, I can see myself doing other things in addition to this, but I love doing it.
Like what? What could you see yourself doing?
I love the idea of film. I love the idea of, I like the idea of creating things in the art world. So, so things that are things that I'm kind of doing now, but more in just the free time that I have.
You started out in life as an actor.
Not really. Really.
Well,
I was in LA, and I did everything in LA, and that was one of the things that in order to survive.
But it's kind of interesting to think that maybe Thom Browne is your performance, is your Academy Award winning performance, just happens to be in fashion.
I don't know about Academy Award winning, but
lifetime achievement at least. Thom, it's lovely to see you. Thank you so much for coming on today, and God knows when we'll see each other, but I wish you all the best, and I hope that America gets its vaccine soon, and I hope you're happy about all the changes that are happening in America, if you feel good about them.
So good.
Oh, good.
So good.
It's easier to read newspapers now than it was 6 months ago, that's for sure.
Well, even just last night, you just see our leaders, just being the most beautiful, empathetic people, caring about people. And that is just as simple and as idea as that is. And here's Hector.
Hector, how old is Hector now?
5.
Oh, the inspiration for your best-selling accessory.
Yes, he is.
Does Hector have a girlfriend? Boyfriend?
No, he doesn't.
Oh, that's the one thing we miss. We when our dogs died, we can't get, it's impossible to get, we were going to get rescues and you just can't.
Oh, really?
All closed down, so.
That was a great thing here in the States. All the rescues were rescued.
Yeah, yeah. But now they were here as well, and now they're being returned. They're being unrescued by people who find that actually they can't handle dogs.
Oh, nice.
Because they're not complete people, so they can't handle dogs. So anyway, that's by the by. Hi to Andrew.
Take care. Good to see you.